video game one specifically is going to be the next one that I'm going to work on. I'm not going to say exactly what it is, but there will probably be a hint or two somewhere in this video. Could be right now. So I could have talked about a lot of things for my first Sonic video. I could have talked about how, despite being an incredibly flawed game, Sonic Adventure 2 is still probably one of my favorite games of all time. Or I could have talked about how the first 3 Sonic games is a very simple yet beautiful trilogy of games. Actually, let me write that down. That's actually a really good idea. Again, I could have talked about anything like that. But no. Let's talk about Knuckles. So, just to clarify, I'm talking about the Paramount Plus miniseries with the same name, not just overall the character of Knuckles the Echidna. You know, the sequel, midquel, spin-off thing of the Sonic movie universe. Just to give a brief explanation to what the show is about, it's about Knuckles the Echidna, who is once again voiced by Idris Elba, adjusting to his new home on Earth after the events of Sonic 2, all the while helping Wade Whipple become a warrior in his very own right. So I'll be honest, I've seen a lot of people call this show not good or just outright the worst piece of Sonic media ever. Now, I think that while it's not the worst thing Sonic's ever put out, I also don't think it's that great either. Like, I'll admit the show is not good. Like, if I had to grade it on a scale of 1 to 10, like, gun to my head, pick a score, I'd probably give it like a 5.5 out of 10. Unfortunately, at this point, I can't talk about the show anymore without getting into spoilers. So if you really want to watch Knuckles, then by all means, take a crack at it, especially if you're a Sonic fan, just so you can get your own opinion on it. But yeah, at this point, this is your official spoiler warning, and we're going to break it down episode by episode. So before we actually start talking about the show itself, I should probably mention that there probably won't be any, if all, clips from the show, just because I feel like Viacom would come for my throat. So I haven't really made a real decision on if I'm gonna do that or not as of the point of me recording this. Future me will know what we're doing in post. So yeah. Episode 1 is probably the most tame episode in the series, in all honesty. We're probably like a month after the events of Sonic 2, and Knuckles is keeping up his training because warriors don't rest in peacetime. He sees people, quote-unquote, attacking the Wachowski household, where he's been crashing with Sonic and Tails. Turns out this is just people trying to work on the house itself. Maddie is reasonably upset, because this is apparently like the 4th time Knuckles has done this, you know, trying to commit murder on people who's just trying to do their job. Sonic volunteers to talk to Knuckles because he totally understands what Knuckles is going through in terms of, you know, adjusting to a new home, not living by yourself, trusting people. The main advice Sonic gives to Knuckles is just make yourself at home, dude. And throughout the night, Knuckles decides that he's going to take that advice literally. And what I mean by that is that he turns the Wachowski living room overnight into a battle arena where he lets the household pet, Ozzy the regular dog, go up against his arch rival, the Mailman. Maddie, at this point, is fed up and decides to ground Knuckles. Since Tom is gone, Maddie decides to try and call Wade Whipple, you know, Tom's deputy sheriff and best friend, to watch Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, but she can't get to him because dude is currently at a bowling match with his friend, teammate, bounty hunter person, Jack Sinclair, and chokes the match to a girl named Susie who is like 8 years old. She actually got in Pro's head and he just chokes a strike and is just, I believe, the 10 pin remaining. Wade apologizes to Jack and that he'll do better at the tournament in Reno, but Jack isn't having it at all, and chooses to drop Wade for Susie. While that's happening, Knuckles is vibing in the attic as all grounded children do when he's visited by the spirit of his old chief, Pachacamac. Pachacamac is voiced by Christopher Lloyd. Okay. Knuckles tries to explain that he has no purpose in his life because he already found the Master Emerald, but Pachacamac tells Knuckles that's okay because his new mission is to train a student in the way of the Echidna. This student that he decides is going to be Wade, all because he wants to compete in the tournament in Reno. Knuckles and Pachacamac views this as a tournament of champions and great glory can be achieved there. Knuckles leaves the house because a warrior has no home and goes to visit Wade to discuss the mission, and off they go. Across the other side of the world to the gun headquarters in London, we meet Agent Willoughby and Agent Cuddy. I mean Mason, not Cuddy, totally not Cuddy. As they notice Knuckles is officially leaving Green Hills. Not only do they see that, they intentionally kill the surveillance satellite and kick some innocent gun agent into the Mushroom Planet. They contact some dude who's literally known as the Buyer about Knuckles leaving Green Hills, and this Buyer dude decides to send some Knuckles-powered weapons to help the renegade agents capture Knuckles so that he can use our red friend to boost his own underground weapons company. Wade decides to officially kick off his training by showing Knuckles a bowling alley to give him a better idea of the kind of combat Wade delves into. It's also here that we learn that Wade loves bowling because his dad taught him everything he knows. Wade also decides to mention that his dad decided to become a deadbeat and leave Wade and his whole family at a godforsaken TJ Maxx. Knuckles realizes that bowling makes Wade feel at home, and then after a bit of cosmic bowling, Willoughby and Mason pop in by a ring and decides to shoot up the entire bowling alley to try and capture Knuckles. Fight scene ensues, and they do actually capture Knuckles, ending the episode with Wade needing to come up with a rescue plan. So let me honestly start with the good in this episode. The writing team, for the most part, kept the character of Knuckles intact. He approaches everything with a tribal warrior mindset, and Idris Elba once again does a insanely good job at the role. And to be frank, the entire voice acting team did a serious good job. Some of the jokes did hit for me. Sonic and Tails explaining to Knuckles what grounding is, Pachacamac's little ghost slapstick, and a couple of others, not just here but throughout the entire series, did get a chuckle out of me. The fight choreography, especially in this episode and episode 3, isn't bad at all. Willoughby using the force of her own laser pistols to get her off the ground for some aerial shots is pretty creative. In terms of the bad, if you're actually going to watch this show, you need to get used to a couple of things. The first thing is the spam of needle drops. Needle drop. A needle drop is where a pre-existing song is used in a film to underscore a particular scene. See Knuckles, the Mario movie. You are going to hear bare minimum one licensed song per episode. In the case of episode 1, you are going to hear Scandals the Warrior about 4 or 5 times before you are done with this episode. The second thing you will need to adjust to is the amount of Wade you are going to see on screen. If you do not like the character of Wade Whipple, then you are going to absolutely hate this show. Wade, in all seriousness, feels more like the main character than Knuckles, and he is the titular character. And the final thing you should probably get used to is the lack of explanation on things. Like, how did Knuckles leave the house? Where did Gunn not only get the rings, but how did Agent Mason acquire a ring? These and other things throughout the series do not get a bit of explanation. A Okay, so good news is episode 2 is so easy to explain that it is actually the shortest episode in the entire script. So here we go. Knuckles is held captive by Mason and Willoughby as they wait for the buyer to meet up with them at the Ice Cap Lodge, which, by the way, writers, a very nice homage there. Wade tries to think of a way to save Knuckles, has a whole daydream of him being cool while saving Knuckles, while he listens to Bonnie Tyler's holding out for a hero, just thinking about what the plan is going to be as he lays it out. He runs to the store to grab some supplies he needs for the plan, including sunglasses, because you cannot execute a cool plan without sunglasses. And the dude working there probably just thought about putting Wade on some sort of list. Wade goes to execute the plan. Said plan fails immensely, but luckily for him, both him and the gun agents are so incompetent at their job that Wade somehow saves Knuckles and drives off after hijacking a truck because Wade's patrol car explodes. Mason and Willoughby put out a bounty for Knuckles and Wade, and the announcement reaches the radio.
Rock Zone Special Report.
I come to make an announcement. Shadow the Hedgehog's a bitch-ass motherfucker. He pissed on my fucking wife. That's right. He took his hedgehog fucking quilly dick out and he pissed on my fucking wife, and he said his dick was this big. And I said that's disgusting. So I'm making a call-out post on my Twitter.com. Shadow the Hedgehog, you got a small dick.
So Wade does the only logical thing in his time of need and takes him and Knuckles to the only place where he thinks they'll be safe, his mom's house. Like I said, this episode is extremely simple and extremely short in terms of just what happens here. And just to list off some good things I liked about the episode, I can tell that Kid Cudi had a lot of fun playing Agent Mason in this episode. And besides that, I appreciate the fact that Wade shows that not only he's a caring person, but also really creative when it comes to ideas. Plus, I appreciate the fact that the writers remembered that Knuckles can glide for short distances, like how they remembered that he can dig and loves grapes in episode 1. But I mean, other than that, this episode was just kind of okay. Nothing really blew me away. So this episode and the one after are probably my two favorite in the entire show just because of how insane they are. Okay, so we get to Wade's mom's house. Her name, we find out later, is Wendy. This is also where we meet Wade's sister, Wanda, who is an over-the-top, bratty FBI agent. Wade and Wanda do not get along in the slightest, and Wendy is unfortunately the actual Jewish single mom who has to deal with it the entire time. Knuckles is introduced to Wendy, who faints from either sheer shock or someone is actually giving her genuine respect. After Wendy wakes up and gets the gist of who Knuckles is, she acts like Knuckles is just a normal person, and I honestly love it. Wendy actually respects Knuckles as a guest to the point where she actually invites him to dinner with the family. Knuckles gladly accepts because he's a very good guest, but Wade instantly gets PTSD because he realizes that it is Shabbat. Shabbat is the Jewish day of rest. Shabbat happens each week from sunset on Friday to sunset on Saturday. During Shabbat, Jewish people remember the story of creation from the Torah, where God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. The actual Shabbat dinner, minus Knuckles' learning of Jewish history and how it's kinda similar to the echidnas, to the point where Wendy even says that Knuckles is, and I quote, basically Jewish, goes horribly, not limited but not including Wanda stabbing Wade in the arm with a fork. Knuckles goes to visit Wade in his room and talks to Wade about the posters on his wall, or as Knuckles describes it, the pantheon of heroes, and delves into Wade's father issues. Knuckles comes to the rightful conclusion that Wade's dad, Pete, is indeed a bum. So after Knuckles goes down to have a heart-to-heart with Wendy while eating key lime pie, which, by the way, really good pick for a pie, the house gets ambushed by a bunch of thugs who attack the house just to collect the bounty on Knuckles and Wade, where we honestly get a really cool fight scene around the Whipple family coming together and trying to make sure the Shabbat candles don't get bothered. The thugs run off and the episode ends with the family around the Shabbat candles as they burn away. This was a really wholesome episode in the aspect of Knuckles gets a real understanding of what a family is like, and we see a broken family, minus the bum of a father, come back together to defend their home. Like I said, I really enjoyed the fight scene at the episode's climax. It is a little off-putting to hear some Jewish music in the background, but I get what they're going for. In terms of what I didn't like about the episode, basically anything that involved Wanda, she is probably my least favorite character in the whole series. She is annoying, she is bratty, she is an outright pain in the ass. And again, she stabbed her brother in the arm with a fork because she could. Other than that, it was a solid episode. So it's at this point, when I started watching the second half of the series, that I actually remembered to write notes of the episode specifically as it was going. And Lord, good thing I did, because it gets insane. So at this point, minus how I feel about each episode, I'm just going to go off of my notes. So episode 4 starts with Wade getting the newspaper and fixes a bowl of cereal as if literally nothing happened the night before, while his mom's house is in complete shambles and there is a giant hole on the side of his house. And then Wade gets captured and is being dragged by a rope down the road, like his ankles are tied and is getting dragged down the road on a motorcycle. Knuckles doesn't even think about helping Wade because this is part of his warrior training. And no, Knuckles is saying this while he's casually drinking a pot of coffee, not a mug of coffee, not a cup of coffee, an entire pot of coffee. And that is within the first minute of the episode, because after that is when we actually get the intro. And then after the intro, Wade continues to get dragged down the road until he gets to the lodge from episode 2, where it turns out his old bounty hunting friend Jack is revealed to be the one who captured him while wearing Knuckles' hat from the Sonic OVA. You know, this OVA. Jack, after justifying why he caged his best friend in the name of money, goes into the party bus to sing karaoke with Susie and her parents as they go to Reno. Knuckles somehow calls Wade because Knuckles knows how to use a phone, I guess. I don't know how that even happened. I didn't even know Knuckles had... I don't know how Knuckles knows how to use technology, but whatever. Wade gets electrocuted to the point where he gets knocked out and starts dreaming of his great battlefield in the sky, aka the bowling alley, and runs into Chief Pachacamac. Wade's next lesson in this fever dream is a rock opera of Knuckles' backstory, just so Wade understands where Knuckles started out from. And Chief Pachacamac says, and I quote, to Wade, before the opera even begins,
"Hey Wade, go make this weirder than it already is."
So, during the rock opera of Knuckles' backstory, we meet Knuckles' dad, or at least a representation of his dad. Spoilers, Knuckles' dad dies in the attack by the giant owls. And when Knuckles' dad is laying on the ground dying, I am 99.9% sure that is supposed to be Ken Penders. If you don't know who Ken Penders is, please look him up. That is a story and a half. And I do have to ask, and I'm not kidding when I ask this, what in the fuck is Michael Bolton doing here? Like, it's not just, oh, Michael Bolton makes a cameo. No, like, Wade / Knuckles' singing voice is Michael Bolton. And Jack, who in this stream is like a giant owl, even outright says, Michael Bolton, everyone. Like, what is this show? And so during the opera, we see like Wade going through like this obstacle course that is supposed to be like a representation of Sonic's world. And apparently the Half-Pipe special stage and Badniks exist in the movieverse, I guess. And then like the big monster that is holding the quote-unquote flames of disaster, I'm like 99.9% sure that is supposed to be Iblis from Sonic 06, which makes complete sense because Iblis was known as like the flames of disaster, as a boss for Knuckles to overcome. That makes complete sense. So like, I guess, hi Iblis, I guess. And Wade decides that the lesson of the story is that he needs to go down the path of what I call left, right, good night. Like he thinks that's the way to go, and he wakes up from the dream, tries to punch the cage, and that goes as well as you think it does. He gets knocked back out, and he realizes that the path of the warrior is actually what's inside of him all along. He wakes back up and uppercuts the cage, screwing up his lower back, as he logically probably does. And then Wade and Jack have a joust where Wade cuts off Jax's ponytail and gets told by Susie's mom to commit murder. And Wade just decides, instead of killing Jack, because that would be the completely wrong thing to do, just takes Jack's stuff instead, like hat, motorcycle, jacket, bowling shirt, everything. And that is the last of Jack we see in this series. And then Knuckles and Wade, with hat in tow, drive into the sunset to Reno, Nevada. Jesus Christ, that was a lot. And oddly enough, a lot of people don't like this episode just because of how out there it is. And while I do agree the episode isn't amazing, but I had a lot of fun with this episode and episode 3. Unfortunately, this episode is where the show peaks, and Knuckles as a series remains pretty odd, but overall the quality in my eyes does go into a down spiral. The penultimate episode is here, and while I think quality-wise it's definitely on a downward spiral, there's still a lot going on, like the bowling tournament starting and we meet Wade's dad, so back to the notes we go. Episode starts with Wade and Knuckles arriving to Reno with "Damn, It Feels Good to Be a Gangsta" by the Ghetto Boys. Okay. And in terms of like the actual building they go to in Reno, it feels like it's supposed to represent Casinopolis from Sonic Adventure 1. Now, again, that could very easily be me reaching, but honestly, who knows? Wade's sister meets up with them, and so does Wendy. Wanda decides to offer Knuckles a chance to drink margaritas, because that's something a Sonic character has done in their life. And it's at this point we actually do meet Wade's dad, Pistol Pete Whipple, who is a very flamboyant, flashy man whose persona is him trying to be very fancy, very British. But as Wendy points out later, it is 100% a sham. And Wade decides he's going to take this opportunity to have a conversation with his father to try and just talk to him after not seeing him for literal years. And Knuckles, being this great communicator that he thinks he is, decides he's going to coach Wade through this conversation. And this goes back to my initial question last episode. How does Knuckles know how to use a phone or earbuds or anything like that? And then we get a good couple of minutes of the episode where Knuckles is like relaying words for Wade to say, and it's that trend of like saying word for word what the other person is saying to try and make a good impression, and it's not good. It's not good at all. And then Agent Mason and Willoughby actually are back after like 3 episodes, so good on them. And then turns out the buyer used to work for Gun before it was called Gun, and he actually used to work for Eggman, who in this world is still known as Robotnik. But I mean, it's Eggman. we find out once the bowling tournament actually starts that it is actually being aired on ESPN8, the Ocho, and that is a very pleasant surprise. I did not expect any real life channels to be featured, let alone the Ocho. So that is a very pleasant surprise for me. I do like that a lot. There's like just a creative choice. Once the 2v2 bowling tournament actually starts, it turns to like this 80s sports montage of like the tournament going through each round and each matchup. And it's honestly kind of cute. And this is where we see Pistol Pete's bowling ball. And it is like a super clear ball of like a teacup inside, which for a bowling ball design, I don't know really how that works like logistically, but at least it looks neat. You know, at least it looks cool enough. Like, and of course we find out it's Wade versus Pete in the finals, which is gonna be the next day, because of course it is. They're gonna dedicate an entire day to the finals of the tournament. And it's at this point where Wade and Pete actually start to really reconnect, and Wade decides that he outright wants to have the talk with his dad, who for some reason decides to go with it. You know what, as much as I give Pete shit, it could be for, and the reason could be for something later. He does respect the time with Wade where he declines autographs. Like, people want to get his autograph and he just says not when I'm with family. Again, I feel like that's probably to build trust, but at the same time, it at least for Wade, it's great. And then we find out that Pete decided to leave his family at TJ Maxx because he wanted to go what is essentially a spiritual journey, which is essentially his bowling career. So, okay, dude, Wade decides that, okay, Dad, I forgive you for leaving me, my mom, and my sister for all these years. And Wendy is reasonably enough worried that this is not going to end well. And then she gets kidnapped by Agent Mason, and Wanda gets kidnapped by Agent Mason. And then, oh no, turns out that Pete is indeed a rat bastard. He's the one that set up the entire trap for Mason and Willoughby to capture Knuckles by using his family as hostages. Which, fun fact, is not explained why he does that in the slightest. He uses the tournament as like leverage to be like, hey, withdraw from the tournament, give me Knuckles. Like, give them Knuckles, and then like, we'll let everybody go. And Wade doesn't care if his sister gets domed in the head by like a laser gun, but he cares a lot if his mom does, which honestly, you know what, that's fair. That is extremely fair. And the episode ends with Wade seemingly betraying Knuckles by sending him up to Pete's lounge to be caught by Willoughby and Mason, end up in the lobby. So while this episode does get points for me by acting like the second coming of Alley Cat Strike, including but not limited to the inclusion of the Ocho, this episode also does the trend of someone trying to coach a friend through an awkward conversation, and I've never been a fan of that trope at all. I also really don't vibe with the fact that Wade just forgives his dad after abandoning him for years. It never realistically works out like that, and just those and a couple of other things just doesn't let this episode click for me, and the final episode really doesn't help in the slightest. So episode 6 is a very strange one. On one hand, it is the most out-of-pocket episode in the entire series when you take lines out of context, but it is also the most anticlimactic finale I have ever seen to a show. So Knuckles goes up to the suite knowing the entire plan because he apparently had a AirPod in his ear of the conversation Wade was having with Mason and Willoughby and Pete. Which, again, how Knuckles has an AirPod in his ear, and like how that works is beyond me at this point. And honestly, at this point, I don't care. And the moment Knuckles gets up to the suite, fights ensues with Willoughby, Mason, and Knuckles, like 2v1 again. Rematch from episodes 1 and 2. All the while, Wade is saving his family. Wanda, absolutely, again, being the pain in the ass that she is, refuses to have Wade free her because she can dislocate her thumb enough to undo the handcuffs, like to slip through it. You know, FBI tactic and all that. And apparently, in this episode, we learn that not only can you destroy rings in this universe, like if you do, they turn into like a mini black hole and they suck Willoughby and Mason into, I forget which planet it is. And that is the last time you ever see those two. So yeah, there goes our, like, I guess, technical main antagonists of the series, and the episode's not even halfway done. And then we get back to the bowling tournament. Pete thinks that Wade already, like, withdrew from the tournament. He thinks he has it in the bag. The commentators talk about, like, Wade's history with Pete. And they mention how Pete left Wade and his family. And one of the commentators say, and I quote,
"Regardless of how you feel about childhood abandonment, and I'm against it.
Me too.
The deals at TJ Maxx cannot be beat."
No, I wish my dad left me at a TJ Maxx.
And that's not the only out of pocket, out of context line in this episode. It is almost immediately followed up once Wade gets there. Look at the balls on this guy. Again, like I said, this episode is weird in terms of, like, just lines that they actually wrote and greenlit. And then, like, as Wade versus Pete is going on, Knuckles is initially watching, and then he hears screams in the background. So he goes to check it out, and then the buyer returns in, like, a mech that is powered by Knuckles' like quills that he's collected. And so we have a random fight scene in the middle of my bowling tournament, and Knuckles is getting beat really bad, to the point where, like, his energy is sucked up. But before we get back to that, we have Wade doing bowling tournament. Very Cody Rhodes, very
I have to finish the story.
And you know what? I appreciate the show for letting Wade win the tournament before Knuckles came back on screen. You know, very kind of them. Very, very kind of them. And then the final fight with the buyer and Knuckles is very similar to the climax of Sonic 1. Dude in, like, a giant robot fighting one of our main protagonists. Their energy gets sucked up to where they can't do anything. And a human comes in to help them. And our main character realizes, oh hey, this is my home. I must defend my home. They gain their power back and beat the baddie. And that is the climax of Sonic 1, but you know, well, not Sonic 1. That is the climax of this entire final episode. And I will say there is, like, a really cool, like, guitar playing while Knuckles is winning as soon as he uses the Flames of Disaster, which is, like, just fire fists. I don't know. At this point, this show is too far gone from making sense to me. And after the tournament and after everything is all said and done, the commentators are talking about, like, how this actually isn't the first time an extraterrestrial has came to the Tournament of Champions. They say that an extraterrestrial being was here in the 1974 tournament, but he was black and not red. So was that Shadow? Was Shadow on Earth 50 years ago when he should have been on the Ark? That's, like, the only piece of foreshadowing we have for Sonic 3, which, like, I don't know if we count that as foreshadowing or not, or just a weird Easter egg. I don't know. And then the show ends with Wade and Knuckles doing a jump, freeze frame, high five. And yeah, that's how the show ends. Just a freeze frame in a post-credit scene of Wade and Knuckles riding back to Green Hills listening to music. We don't see any reactions from Sonic & Co. on how Knuckles' journey went. Nothing, like, just nothing. This ending to me felt extremely flat. I think the final episode perfectly summarizes what this show is. It's a show that has weird, fun quirks, but ultimately does nothing of real significance, is mediocre, and does nothing to help the story of the Sonic movies in any capacity. So I think I should really drive home what I did like about Knuckles before I dive into my raw thoughts that I wrote down immediately after finishing the show. I think the show has moments where it has good fight choreography. I think the cast as a whole did a really good job, especially with what they had to work with. This show did get genuine laughs out of me from time to time, whether I was supposed to or not. I found the show kind of funny at times. And I think the show had potential to be something really fun. And that's what it was. It had potential, but as a show, it just misses the mark for what it needed to do. But in terms of like my raw thoughts, this show is somehow this is somehow the stupidest show I have ever seen in the best and worst way possible at the same time, and that is a really hard thing to pull off, but they somehow did it in 6 episodes, so good on them, I guess. And like I said, like at the beginning of the video, back in episode 1, I feel like they used Knuckles as a way to tell a Wade story. Like, this didn't feel like a Knuckles-centered story. This felt like a Wade story. And I guess I understand why they chose Knuckles, because they obviously couldn't market a show just called Wade. They used Knuckles mainly as like a platform to push the story they wanted to tell. And I know I make comparisons at the end to Sonic 1, but this did feel like as if Sonic 1 was a TV show. Like, you have the buddy cop story of an alien and a human getting to know each other, and the alien getting used to their new home. And again, the final boss, like the main antagonist, is just called the Buyer. Why he is just called the Buyer, I don't know. It's stupid. It will always be stupid. Going back to positives real quick, Kid Cudi seemed like he had a lot of fun in this show. So like, honestly, good on him. I'm proud of him for having a fun side quest. And then the last 2, I guess I'll say, in terms of just my raw thoughts when finishing the show, is that I really hope that this has nothing important to do in the slightest for Sonic 3. I think the best way to approach this show is just to have this not be important to the overall plot at all, which is like a shame, because I think this show could have done something for the plot, but considering what this show turned out to be, I really hope it's not needed for people to enjoy Sonic 3. And then I said that this wasn't the worst piece of Sonic media, because it's not. I would still rather watch all 6 of these episodes than play Sonic Forces. But hey, that's my take on everything. If you happen to disagree, let me know down in the comments. And while you're there, feel free to like and subscribe. Now, if y'all need me, Multiverses just dropped and Slayer just made his return to Guilty Gear. I think it's time I have some fun. Actually, real quick before I go, I just wanted to say that I would still rather take Pistol P as my dad than Drake. Bye!